I've actually already met 2021. I would describe her as considerate, almost chill, kind of gentle, team player, not into politics.
Boring.
Police are squabbling with protesters. Oh, there we go. And they just breached the Capitol again.
Steve Cohen's twisted remarks there pass as thinking in his judgment. Cohen's attack on our National Guard comes as Nancy Pelosi praises the Guard's presence. Yet when President Trump asked for a military parade in the nation's capital, the Pentagon said it was far too expensive, and the radical Dems, they couldn't possibly support the idea. Instead, Pelosi and the Dems are fine with 25,000 troops now in the nation's capital to protect what is a virtual inauguration for a man who just received 80 million votes. How does that work? Giving our nation's capital the appearance of a third world nation. For more on what's happening on the ground in Washington, we turn to Fox News correspondent Mike Tobin. Mike?
And Lou, let me give you a quick look around in this area of North Capitol Street, very near Union Station. You can see the presence of the National Guard with one of the vehicles there as we're here on North Capitol Street. As we look in the direction of the Capitol, you can see some of that fencing that's now ubiquitous. It's all over town. On top of that is some of the 12,000 feet of razor wire that now surrounds the Capitol. You also see the presence of some of the Capitol Police. You can't go a few blocks in this town without running into some fencing, into a roadblock, into another checkpoint with security forces and the ubiquitous presence of the National Guard. As we watched yesterday, squad after squad, platoon after platoon of Guard were showing up. There are now some 21,000 troops on the ground. 25, in fact, we're told excess of 25,000 troops are expected, and they will be vetted by the FBI and the Secret Service. Secretary of the Army confirms that. The acting defense secretary says there is no intel of a specific plot, but experts watching the process say the security forces are operating with this overabundance of caution, largely in light of the criticism that they were unprepared for January the 6th.
It's not surprising that our security forces, having seen that take place, are erring on the side of being over-prepared and providing as much deterrence as they possibly can to anybody coming to D.C. to interrupt the inaugurations.
And the checkpoints have resulted in arrests. One man was picked up Friday night with non-governmental credentials, a weapon, and ammo. He later told our Fox affiliate he was working as a security guard to get lost in this maze of checkpoints and fencing, and he is not, he insists, a domestic terrorist. A woman was also picked up for impersonating a police officer. She was referred to mental health, and another man was arrested over the weekend carrying weapons and high-capacity magazines. Lou, back to you.
Mike, thank you very much. Mike Tobin, quite a sight. 25,000 of our National Guard in the nation's capital to protect what will be a virtual inauguration.
Thousands of National Guardsmen are now back into the Capitol building after being forced to move into a parking garage.
Yeah, U.S. Capitol Police told the troops they could no longer use space within the U.S. Capitol complex as a rest area. The group was forced to rest in a nearby parking garage without internet reception, with just one electrical outlet and one bathroom for about 5,000 troop members. And temperatures in Washington, as you know, were in the low 40s by nighttime.
Lawmakers from both parties were outraged by the move and demanded the decision to be reversed. The National Guard troops have since moved back into the Capitol building.
In North Carolina, Congressman Madison Cawthorn was outraged by this news, so he visited them and, as you heard, took them pizza. On Twitter, Cawthorn said, quote, "I just visited the soldiers who have been abandoned and insulted by our leaders. I brought them pizza and told them that they can sleep in my office. No soldier will ever sleep on a garage floor in the U.S. Capitol while I work in Congress. Our troops deserve better."
Right, next hour, Fox News alert: the D.C. National Guard will now stay at the Capitol through the end of March. Their deployment extended amid concerns of more unrest. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Dana Perino.
Thanks, me, Bill Hemmer. Good morning to you. The mission not over yet. Security officials warning this is no time to draw down. We're learning that 11 House Republicans are writing to the acting Secretary of the Army requesting a briefing on plans to keep the Guard in place. Lucas Tomlinson at the Pentagon. What's driving the decision there, Lucas? Good morning.
Bill, I'm told the FBI and Secret Service made that request. This as the new head of the Capitol Police admitted to failing to protect the Capitol during the riot 3 weeks ago. Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan was in the meeting.
And we're not going to let the National Guard go home, or we're not going to create an unsafe environment for the country's business until we have that figured out.
But not everyone wants to keep the troops in D.C. Senator Tom Cotton writing on FoxNews.com today, I sit on the Intelligence Committee, but I'm aware of no specific credible threat reporting, as distinguished from aspirational, uncoordinated bluster on the internet that justifies this continued troop presence. Also on FoxNews.com, as you mentioned, Bill, 11 House Republicans writing the acting Army Secretary demanding a briefing on why some 3,000 National Guardsmen will remain in D.C. through the end of March. In an interview with the Washington Post, the head of D.C.'s National Guard said the Pentagon restricted his authority to respond to the January 6th riot. I'm told top brass here are furious about this attempt to throw the Pentagon under the bus. Bill,
thank you, Lucas. Watch that
but
for you.
First,
Thank
to
you.
the most utterly absurd news of the week. The BLM movement has been nominated for the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize. Seriously. Welcome to 1984, where war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. How do you even parody something that is so insanely grotesque? A deeply divisive and destructive neo-Marxist group that is virulently anti-police, anti-capitalist and anti-nuclear family, a group responsible for hundreds of violent protests throughout the US and other countries, could actually win the Peace Prize. Look at the destruction they wrought. More than 24 people were killed during the BLM riots. Hundreds more were assaulted, and homes and businesses were looted and burnt to the ground, costing around $2 billion US worth of damage. I thought after the Capitol Hill riots, the left would finally come to accept that violence and rioting are not things to be celebrated or whitewashed. But alas, they have learnt nothing. While they categorise one riot as an insurrection or a coup, they celebrate hundreds of violent riots by leftist agitators as righteous acts of social justice. The Nobel Peace Prize is meant to acknowledge an individual or group that has done the best work for fraternity between nations and people and the promotion of peace. Does this look peaceful to you? Are you feeling the peace yet? I don't know about you, but my peaceful levels aren't peaking yet. In 2020, the US experienced 637 riots between just May 26 and September 12, and 91% of those riots were linked to the Black Lives Matter movement, according to US Crisis Monitor. This group, started by trained neo-Marxists, has not only set back racial relations in the US, but also everywhere else its activists ply their divisive antics. In the UK, the majority of Brits believe the group has increased racial tensions. But this movement, despite its violence and unashamed anti-police, anti-West rhetoric, is embraced by corporations, politicians, celebrities, academics, and of course, the media. There are hours and hours of BLM riots and violence caught on video, from people being bashed and businesses destroyed, to diners being harassed for refusing to submit to the mob. But the media prefer to focus on the movement's name rather than its ideology and violence. So here we are. War is peace, freedom is slavery, and BLM is nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.
It means that we have members of Congress who want to bring guns on the floor and have threatened violence on other members of Congress.
Chilling words from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on Thursday, who in the wake of the deadly siege on the U.S. Capitol said lawmakers would likely need more funding for security to protect them not just from outside threats, but also potentially from their own colleagues in the House of Representatives, whom she described as, quote, the enemy within.
I do believe, and I have said this all along, that we will probably need a supplemental for more security for members when the enemy is within the House of Representatives.
What exactly did you mean when you said that the enemy is within? What exactly did you mean by that?
It means that we have members of Congress who want to bring guns on the floor and have threatened violence on other members of Congress.
Pelosi did not name names, but earlier in her press conference was asked about newly elected Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, who has come under scrutiny this week for online comments she posted before taking office supporting violence against Democrats, including Pelosi. Greene is the first member of Congress to have openly expressed support for the QAnon conspiracy theory, and in a video from 2019 that resurfaced and went viral this week, is seen harassing a student who survived the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, the year before. Greene now sits on the House Education and Labor Committee.
What would you like to see done about her?
What I'm concerned about is the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives, who is willing to overlook, ignore those statements, assigning her to the Education Committee when she has mocked the killing of little children at Sandy Hook Elementary School, when she has mocked the killing of teenagers in high school at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. What could they be thinking, or is thinking too generous a word for what they might be doing?
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the most prominent Catholic politician in the U.S. after President Joe Biden, recently criticized the pro-life movement's efforts to stand up for the unborn. In a podcast interview with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton last week, Pelosi accused pro-lifers of putting their opposition to abortion over the principle of democracy and accused pro-lifers of being sellouts. Take a listen.
And then you take the abortion issue. Many of these people are very good people. That's just their point of view. But they were willing to sell the whole democracy down the river for that one issue.
Amen. We will wrap up on the note of, I think, your 9 grandchildren
yes.
and my 3 grandchildren. So we have a dozen perfectly good reasons to get up every day and continue the fight for the future we want, not just for our grandkids, but really for every child.
All the children.
To live up to his or her God-given potential. That's what it's all about.
That was the voice of former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton agreeing with Pelosi's comments on abortion. Pelosi continued to slam pro-lifers, saying people who reject abortion should, quote, love contraception. And anyone with opposing views are hypocrites if they don't have large families. The Archbishop of San Francisco, who is Pelosi's Archbishop, quickly provided a strong response, saying the House Speaker does not speak for the Catholic Church. Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone released a statement saying in part, quote, to begin with the obvious, Nancy Pelosi does not speak for the Catholic Church. She speaks as a high-level, important government leader and as a private citizen. He continued. And on the question of the equal dignity of human life in the womb, she, Pelosi, also speaks in direct contradiction to a fundamental human right that Catholic teaching has consistently championed for 2,000 years. Joining us now via Skype is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. Your Excellency, welcome to the show. I just read part of your statement to our viewers, responding to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's recent comments on pro-lifers. But can you expand? What are your thoughts to what the House Speaker, a Catholic, had to say about the pro-life movement, particularly about pro-lifers being sellouts?
There are 2 aspects to her comments that bothered me very much. One is we know how bitterly divided and polarized the country is. We have President Biden speaking a lot about unity and healing in his inaugural address, he said we have to get past this red versus blue and conservative versus liberal. We need humility and tolerance and walk in the other person's shoes. Now, whether or not he actually pursues a path of unity is another question, but this is what he's talking, and everyone knows this is a need. So when she dismisses people who give priority to the abortion issue in guiding their decision how to vote as selling out our democracy, this is heightening and worsening the polarization. It's the exact opposite of what we need to be doing. I've been hearing and reading for years and years about this, that we need to pay attention to people who think differently than we are. But I don't see people doing it. And this is an example of how, this is just one of many examples of how that contributes to it and it worsens the situation. The other thing is how she's misguiding so many Catholics who think that because she is a prominent political leader, a very important person in our country, and Catholic, and that people think it's acceptable for Catholics to favor abortion. And that's just simply not true. I was very careful how I worded that statement you cited there. It's church teaching, but it's not exclusively church teaching. I mean, this is killing children in the mother's womb, just as killing children outside of the womb, is not something we need revelation to understand is wrong. There are certain truths of the natural moral law that we can understand by reason alone. Murder is wrong, stealing is wrong, arson is wrong, calumny, and all these things. Church teaching specifically, it's not like revealed doctrine. It's not a matter of religious belief. It's a fundamental human right that church teaching reinforces, champions, and promotes. This fundamental human right. Catholics, all matters of justice, Catholics favor and promote.
One of the most troubling remarks to me was when the House Speaker said people who oppose abortion should love contraception and pro-lifers are hypocrites if they don't have large families. Your thoughts on those specific remarks?
Just look around. We've had a contraceptive culture for the last 50 years. Do you see any diminishment of abortion because people are using contraception? It feeds into the mentality of this disaggregation or separation of, marriage, sex and procreation, childbearing and child rearing. All it's a package deal. Once you separate that out, if sex is divorced from all of that, then sort of the contraceptive mentality contributes to that mentality, and contraception doesn't always work. So you need a backup. Abortion is backup contraception. So it feeds into this narrative that's tearing our country down because it's breaking up families, it's abusing people in relationships, it's kids growing up in poverty and broken families. So it's feeding a narrative that is actually destructive. We need to reclaim this vision of the wholesomeness and the good for the society of sex, marriage, and childbearing and child rearing being within the marital embrace and the intact family.
Absolutely. And I would just add, women deserve better than contraception, and not every Catholic pro-life family open to life is blessed with a large family. God is the author of life. Your Excellency, can you explain, you mentioned this earlier, but why is it truly scandalous when prominent Catholic politicians advance and support policies which directly contradict the Church? And of course, we know House Speaker Pelosi is not the only pro-abortion Catholic politician. We're about 1 week into a President Joe Biden administration, only the second Catholic U.S. president, and of course he has a pro-abortion agenda as well. Why is this scandalous?
It contradicts the Church, again, on these issues of fundamental human rights and justice. I mean, it would be bad enough if they were to say something like, "Oh, I don't believe Christ is really present in the Eucharist." That would be specifically contradicting the Church. But this is contradicting the Church on a matter that is not specifically Catholic doctrine. Again, this is a matter of fundamental human rights. So we have political leaders championing an injustice and people thinking that that's okay for Catholics to do, but it's not. Catholics cannot favor anything that is evil. We don't. We oppose evil. The killing of children in their mother's womb is evil. We need to give women real choice. It really unveils the lie behind the pro-choice rhetoric. Those of us in pastoral ministry, we hear women say that, "I didn't want to go through with it, but I felt like I had no choice." The problem is that women don't have choice, not that they do. because all the other choices, those resources have dried up. Abortion is the go-to solution. So it's scandalous because it leads people into error thinking that this is something acceptable, but this is something evil. It's not acceptable. Catholics cannot accept this and favor it. We must fight against it, as we always fight against evil, however that evil manifests itself.
It's Davos week, the Great Reset. You will own nothing and you will be happy. Why do we keep hearing this phrase? What is going on at this Davos? Why are these billionaires getting together? And after making one video about the Great Reset, we've decided to dive a little bit deeper into what you think and further evidence and your legitimate concerns.
It's time to look at the big picture and work collectively. That's the message from day one of Business Bonanza, the Davos Agenda. This year's World Economic Forum has moved online because COVID. Davos this year cannot be the usual networking fest it's built its reputation on.
Davos regulars like Angela Merkel and Bill Gates will check in from around the world, as well as Vladimir Putin, Prime Ministers of India, Japan, Spain, Greece, Israel, Singapore, Presidents of France, Korea, Argentina, South Africa, Secretary General of the United Nations, Director General of the World Health Organization, Governor of the Bank of England, Secretary General of Interpol. The agenda has been shaped by the pandemic and organised around the Great Reset. So I suppose when you talk about it being a conspiracy, it ain't a conspiracy if it's candidly spoken about and explicitly stated. That's not a conspiracy, that's a sort of an agenda. Like, if you believe, as many people do, in the values of detachment, of letting go of possessions, then I feel like the best way to espouse and spread these values is through embodying them and demonstrating them. Nothing to worry about there, that's just a drone delivering a package to your door. That drone couldn't be used for any... Sorry, what? Yeah, you can keep that delivery actually, I'll just wait for the van. They've misjudged the tone as well. You'll eat much less meat. Stop telling me what to do. I'm already vegan. What do you want me to do? Pull meat out of me? An occasional treat, not a staple. The problem is with this video is it's the exact mood of like a dystopian thing that you'd be sort of forced to sit and watch with matchsticks holding your eyes open in a great big terrifying cinema. And then it just goes into bad things. Also, 1 billion people will be displaced by climate change. Finally! No, that's the bad bit.
This is the first opportunity of 2021 for business leaders to come together to talk about jobs, the green economy, and how to shape future sustainable growth.
Markham White is one of the people that brought to our attention the phrase, you will own nothing and you will be happy. My question is, if I don't own anything, then who does? Who controls the resources? Well, it seems like the most obvious answer is the very people who practically own everything now, i.e. members of the World Economic Forum. No conspiracy, just factual and well-stated intentions. Yeah, I'm a bit concerned. Well, Markham, I share your concerns and I share your diagnosis. Captain Muggs, congratulations on the name. You've got to be a few sandwiches short of a picnic if you think the Billionaires Boy Club are out to do you any favours. Give them an inch and they'll take a mile. That's the kind of language I like. I agree with you, mate. Mantis Age, what do Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Monsanto, Walmart and Starbucks have in common? United Nations World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Sustainable development. Did you see David Attenborough's documentary there on Netflix where he says if something can't be done forever, then it's by definition unsustainable, that we have to change many of our practices, and most of those practices are related in one way or another to profit. Stop developing. That's what needs to happen. Never mind sustaining it, and also sustaining something. We want to improve things, don't we? I'm glad that so many of you were engaged by the Great Reset video, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity to dive deeper into a subject that, let's face it, is going to go on and on as globalization continues and the sense that we are separated from power and the way that we are evolved to live becomes more and more distant and remote. We don't live as tribes. We're not in control of our own resources. The idea that we will own nothing and we will be happy sounds like a terrifying, not Orwellian, but sort of Huxleyan idea that we will be somered into compliance, drugged by a sort of a magical substance in our water, into dumb compliance with the objectives of the powerful while we live as kind of human drones.
Makes me feel wonderful. I don't have any qualms about it at all. You know, I feel quite proud of myself of doing something like this. You know, it's just a small thing that can help zillions of people in this country.
Are you feeling sick today?
I'm sorry.
Baseball legend Hank Aaron has died. Hammerin' Hank was known as the Home Run King, one of the best players in the history of the game. In the spring of 1974, Aaron broke Babe Ruth's all-time home run record of 714 when he hit his 715th home run. When Aaron retired in 1976, he had 755 lifetime home runs, a record that stood for over 30 years.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. We've got a couple of tech experts coming up on that. Our other top story, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo facing intense scrutiny tonight following the release of a report by the state's Democratic Attorney General about the number of nursing home deaths there. Correspondent Aisha Hasmi has the latest for us tonight.
Incompetent government kills people.
Words can truly come back to haunt you in less than 24 hours after blaming the federal government for the high number of COVID deaths in his state. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo hit with this bombshell, a 76-page report released by the state's attorney general finding his administration undercounted nursing home deaths by as much as 50%. Officially, the count stands at 9,000, among the highest in the nation, but the state has not been counting nursing home residents who died inside hospitals. In one nursing home, for example, only 11 COVID deaths were counted, when in actuality there were 40. And in addition to the lack of PPE and testing, the report finds government guidance requiring the admission of COVID-19 patients into nursing homes may have put residents at increased risk of harm. The state's health commissioner, Howard Zucker, argues 98% of nursing homes already had COVID before a patient was brought in from the hospital. Still, some state leaders are now calling for his resignation, while others demanding New York's AG subpoena Cuomo's entire administration.
Issue subpoenas immediately against the governor, the commissioner of health in New York State, Dr. Zucker, and his senior staff, because the corruption is the cover-up.
But there may have been even more missteps at the beginning. A May 2020 ProPublica report recounts that Cuomo reacted to New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio's idea for closing down New York City with derision. It was dangerous, he said, and served only to scare people. By mid-May, the report found New York City had nearly 20,000 deaths, while San Francisco just 35. In April, former CDC Director Tom Frieden tweeted, had New York stay-at-home order been issued days earlier, so many deaths could have been prevented. And now, with the AG report on nursing home deaths, the call for answers is growing.
We have to get the full truth, and we have to make sure it never, ever happens again.
And tonight, Republican Whip Steve Scalise has sent over a letter to Governor Cuomo demanding he hand over all information and data relating to those nursing home deaths by next Thursday. And there's this as well. U.S. Senator Ben Sasse tonight writing, it's not too late for the Academy to ask for their stupid trophy back. Of course, he's referencing that controversial Emmy Governor Cuomo received for his daily COVID-19 briefings. Shannon?
Aisha Hasmi for us in New York. Thank you very much, Aisha. Folks in New York are understandably upset, calling for even greater transparency, and some are primarily angry about the loss of their loved ones and demanding accountability. Well, that includes Fox News senior meteorologist Janice Dean, who tragically lost both of her in-laws to COVID-19 in New York assisted living facilities. She tweeted that Governor Cuomo's statement that incompetent government kills people, quote, is right. Too bad he doesn't realize he's talking about himself. So let's discuss it with Republican New York Assembly member for Westchester, Kevin Byrne, and Janice Dean herself. Great to have you both with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
So the New York Times says this about the report today. In the 76-page report released on Thursday by the Attorney General, Letitia James, a survey of nursing homes found consistent discrepancies between deaths reported to the Attorney General's investigators and those reported to and officially released by the Health Department. Janice, I'm not sure you knew much about whether this report or when it was coming. Do you feel in any way that all of your months of calling for this information has been some measure of justice today?
I think so. I mean, there was surprise because all of these months we were asking for accountability. Assemblyman Byrne, by the way, who is with you tonight, has been with me by my side from the very beginning. So I thank him. He has been one of the most wonderful lawmakers to work with that really cares about the people he represents in New York. And, you know, some people could take a few lessons from Assemblyman Byrne. So to answer your question, I think there was some relief that maybe someone was looking out for us and someone was trying to hold the governor accountable.
So Dr. Howard Zucker, the New York State Health Commissioner, has put out a lengthy rebuttal to the claims today. He says this in first talking about the total deaths. He says the report is clear there was no undercount of the death toll. It affirms that the total number of deaths in hospitals and nursing homes is full and accurate. But Assemblyman, that's not the issue. That's not what this report was about.
That's correct. And Shannon, I happen to serve as the ranking member of the lead Republican on the Assembly Health Committee. And so this is something we've been seeking for a very long time through legislative hearings, forums. We've written to the CDC, President Trump, President Biden, trying to get this information for a very long time. And the commissioner is now trying to really equate the total number of all death in New York State to be the issue. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the devastation that happened in our nursing homes and how they, for months, refused to give us the complete number so we can measure how our state did. You know, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? We know there was a highly controversial directive on March 25th that essentially forced COVID-positive patients into nursing homes. How are we supposed to measure that and actually have a real, candid conversation and create better policy and talk about investigations if you won't even give us the public data? Finally, they released something today, but we got more work to do.
Okay, you mentioned that, and Dr. Howard Zucker also responds and talks about that memo. And Janice, you've pointed to this memo many times as something we need more information about exactly what happened. Now, Zucker's statement says the OAG, meaning the Attorney General report, also found no evidence that DOH or the Health Department's March 25th advisory memo resulted in additional fatalities in nursing homes. Janice, I'd like to get you and the Assemblyman to both comment on that. I mean, the memo is what it is.
March 25th, there for 46 days, the governor mandated that COVID-positive patients be put into nursing homes, and he himself said it would be like wildfire through dry grass. He knew the risks that were associated with that, and he has blamed everybody else and everything else except the person that signed that mandate. So there are still questions to be asked and still answers to be had, and maybe this is just the beginning of something a little bit bigger.
Everyone's talking about GameStop stock, Reddit, and short selling, and even old Joe's spokesperson Raggedy Ann was asked what the White House thinks about it.
Is the White House concerned about the stock market activity we're seeing around GameStop, and now with some other stocks as well, including the subsidiary or whatever, the company that was Blockbuster? And have there been any conversations with the SEC about how to proceed?
Well, I'm also happy to repeat that we have the first female Treasury Secretary and a team that's surrounding her, and often questions about market we'll send to them.
Don't worry about a thing, because a woman is in charge of the Treasury. Diversity to the rescue again. And this woman, Janet Yellen, just so happens to have been paid almost $1 million by the firm that bailed out the hedge fund that is directly in the center of this whole debacle. What's happening here is a group of amateur investors who hang out in a Reddit forum called Wall Street Bets discovered that a hedge fund had shorted the stock of GameStop, a video game company that owns stores in malls across the country. Shorting the stock meaning that they're betting on it going to go down, which means that they actually borrowed the shares from somebody and paid a small fee for that, sold the shares, and then are hoping and waiting for the shares to go down, to drop, really to bankrupt the company, and then they're going to buy the shares for a few pennies, return them to the person, the entity that they borrowed them from, and then make a ton of money, having only paid a small fee to borrow those shares. But the Wall Street fat cats never imagined that a group on an internet forum would beat them at their own game by purchasing tons of GameStop stock, driving the price through the roof before the hedge fund was able to purchase the shares back and then return them to the lender, causing the hedge fund to have to pay a historically high price for the stock, making tons of the people in the Wall Street Bet Reddit forum a ton of money. A lot more amateur investors could have made a lot more money at the expense of the Wall Street fat cats, but most of the brokerage firms, particularly Robinhood, which is a very popular mobile app that the millennials use to buy and sell stocks, decided to stop people from being able to buy GameStop stock and a handful of others that were involved in this plan. By stopping what are called retail investors, just your average Joe, from buying the stock, it caused the price to dramatically drop. And many people believe that the brokerage firms did this so that the hedge fund could then buy those shares back up while they were lower instead of having them continue to go sky high and then return them to the entity that they borrowed them from so they wouldn't continue to lose more money by having to buy those shares at a much higher price. And if that's not shady enough, Discord, a popular group chat app amongst the millennials and Generation Z, shut down the Wall Street Bets group, claiming that the users were engaged in hate speech. And then Facebook shut down a Robinhood stock trading group that had over 150,000 members for what they said was the same reason. Now, this kind of game is actually fairly common amongst Wall Street fat cats. There's a famous story of billionaire hedge fund manager Bill Ackman shorting Herbalife stock, borrowing shares, selling them, obligated to buy them back later, but he tried to drive the price down into the ground before he bought them back. But billionaire hedge fund manager Carl Icahn decided to buy a bunch of those shares, driving the price way up. And then when Bill Ackman was legally obligated to purchase those shares again and then return them, he had to pay a ton of money for them, costing him, I think, around $1 billion. And Carl Icahn didn't do this because he thought that Herbalife was a great company and tried to save it. He did this really not even to make $1 billion. He did it because he has a personal beef with Bill Ackman and wanted to screw him out of $1 billion. And that was great. That was two Wall Street titans battling it out head to head for $1 billion. But when a group of ordinary folks on Reddit decided to do exactly the same thing, now everybody says that they're using social media and online forums to manipulate the market.
First of all of this nonsense, all of this noise, all of this whining by Wall Street, it's making me sick. 140% of GameStop was short. I didn't hear one person on TV complaining about Wall Street trying to crush GameStop. 140% short. I told my subscribers, buy this stock, and they made a fortune. You can't allow Wall Street to short 75% of a stock, and nobody says anything. Crush these companies into the dirt, and then when the individual investor makes money, everyone's up in arms. Some people are going to lose and some are going to win, but if they want to change the rules of the game now because the general public is making money after decades of the shorts crushing thousands of stocks into the dirt. I have watched stocks being crushed completely to zero, and no one ever whispered anything because those stocks didn't have Wall Street sponsorship. They were small names. Maybe they went public through a reverse takeover. Whatever it was, the shorts have had their way with the market for decades. No one's ever complained about it. So I am thrilled. If you were going to try to destroy a company by shorting 140% of its stock, you have to accept the fact that individual investors are playing the same game that you're playing, and now you're losing.
A lot of people are understandably upset with Robinhood because they prevented people from purchasing more GameStop stock and others, trying to drive the price up so that they could then sell it to the hedge fund for a higher price and screw them out of money, just like Carl Icahn did to Bill Ackman. So they went to the app stores and started leaving one-star reviews and writing negative reviews for the app. But then Google decided to step in and deleted over 100,000 negative reviews, which had driven the average rating of the app to 1 star, thus bringing it back to normal. So it doesn't look like there was anything wrong with the app or the company at all. And Apple also looks like they prevented new reviews from actually showing up because so far the app over there in the Apple App Store still looks like it's just fantastic and it hasn't changed at all. There's going to probably be congressional hearings into this. That's how big of a deal this is, because people want to find out whether or not Robinhood screwed over their ordinary customers in order to help the big hedge funds. And there's even talk of allegedly the hedge fund and Robinhood have a mutual financial interest in a third party. So this story is definitely not going away. It's so big, in fact, that Jon Stewart, the former host of The Daily Show on Comedy Central before he retired and was replaced by whatever his name is, that affirmative action hire, he just joined Twitter for the first time in order to weigh in on the situation. He misses those days of the housing collapse when he used to rail against the big Wall Street fat cats, but what he never told you was that at the time, his own brother was actually the head of the New York Stock Exchange. What else is not going to be funny is when these Robinhood traders who actually did make a bunch of money on the GameStop stock, who are mostly millennials, learn about what capital gains taxes are and what old Joe plans to do to them. And I guarantee you that before yesterday, Joe Biden thought that Kevin Costner was Robin Hood and Reddit was something that he did to the New York Times every morning. A lot of people can't believe that he actually is the president, and so YouTube is trying to help by putting a little notice on the bottom of videos, you may have seen it, where it simply says, Joe Biden is the president. I'm not kidding, I'm sure you saw the ones about the election where they kept saying for months, Joe Biden won the election. Well, now it says, Joe Biden is the president. Listen, he may be the president now, but we can't talk about how that actually happened here on YouTube because that violates the rules.
Let's talk about Joe Biden. He seems to be set about to destroy America as fast as he possibly can, Rita.
Well, I tell you, he has had wasted no time signing executive orders. At last count, it was over 40, I think around 42 or even more by now. Just an enormous number of executive orders to have signed in less than 2 weeks. More than Trump, Bush, Clinton, Obama, all of them put together. You know, it is just really, I just can't understand why this isn't getting far greater scrutiny and questioning. He's got the Congress, he's got the Senate. Why can't he negotiate with them? Why does he just have to sign executive order after executive order? It's not a dictatorship.
Yeah, well, we hope it's not. Have you seen those armed guards all around the Capitol? Maybe you might be onto something there, Rita. James?
Well, yeah, and we'll be talking about this a bit more in the second hour, but this executive order orgy that Joe Biden has been on is completely counter to what he has been saying before. Back in October, he said, no, I'm not into executive orders, legislation is the way to go. And, of course, everybody criticized Trump whenever he governed by executive order.
He was a dictator.
Everybody said it was perfectly fine when Barack Obama used executive orders to change immigration rules and things like that. But what he is already doing, you've got two Joes. You've got the Joe Biden, which is the, hey, I'm Mr. Unity guy, I'm your nice uncle, I'm the normal guy, the return to normality. And that's how he got
that sounds
the
the moment to play it. We don't have it, but Rita's famous roaches running up his legs clip.
Yeah, well, and he learned about corn pop and all of that.
Exactly.
But at the same time, he's captured by, and the people who seem to be running the show right now are not normal moderate centrist Democrats, but they seem to be very hard left progressives who seem to be determined to push through a very radical agenda, not just to undo what Trump did, because Trump undid a lot of Obama stuff, that's what always happens, but to actually change the way the entire country is organized forever. One thing which we need to talk about down the road is what they're going to be doing in terms of H.R. 1 and electoral reforms, which could essentially mean that mail-in votes are permanently enshrined as the way presidents are elected, which will have, devastating consequences. Many Republicans fear.
And author Abigail Shrier joins us now, back again on Outsiders. Welcome back, Abigail. So glad to have you back on the show. Your fantastic book, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, is what we spoke about last time. I highly recommend everyone grab a copy of that book, Abigail, and I hope sales are going through the roof since you were last on Outsiders. Abigail, welcome back. It's really important reason that we're here to chat today, this morning. We need to look at the future of America under Joe Biden. On just day one of his time as President of the United States, he has signed an executive order on wait for it, gender identity, preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. But Abigail, what does this really mean?
Well, the plain text of the order, what it means is that it spells the end for girls' sports. In the state of Montana right now, they are right now trying to pass a law that would reserve girls' sports for biological girls. And the ACLU has already said, based on the Biden executive order, if you go ahead and pass this law, you will lose almost $500 million in federal funding. That's not something states can afford to lose, especially small states like Montana. And that's exactly what the purpose of the executive order was. It was to warn states and schools that if they didn't consent to the destruction of school sports, of girls' sports specifically, by allowing in biological boys, they would lose their funding.
Rita.
So if a school doesn't allow a male-born athlete who identifies as female from competing in the women's competition, they don't get federal funding. Can you just tell us about some of the differences at the elite level in men's and women's sport? Is there in any world where women could compete against a male athlete?
Not once men have been through puberty. So when they're young, before puberty, boys and girls are roughly equal in sport. But the organizational effects of puberty confer on biological males a massive and unbridgeable advantage. They have vastly greater muscle mass, bone density, larger hearts, larger lungs, more oxygenated blood, more fast-twitch muscle fiber, all things necessary in contests of strength and speed. And to give just one example, so perhaps the most accomplished U.S. sprinter of all time is a woman named Allison Felix, who now holds more Olympic medals than Usain Bolt. And her time for the 400 meter was 49.26 seconds. In 2018, nearly 300 high school boys alone could beat it.
Oh, that's unbelievable. James.
So this would seem to me that this would have huge implications, not just for state funding, but for individuals in their circumstances as well. In the United States, can you tell us a bit about how scholarships work and what the effect that this might have on thousands potentially of young women who would have been looking to go to university, which is a very expensive proposition in the United States, on athletic scholarships? And will they be under threat as a result of this executive order?
They absolutely will. This is the greatest material threat to women's rights in decades. And just to take one example, in the state of Connecticut, young women have sued who are top runners in the state of Connecticut, who are now being beaten by biological boys who were only mediocre athletes on the boys' team. They had no standout achievements on the boys' team, but they are now losing scouting opportunities. They are losing absolutely scholarships. They are losing opportunities to compete in the regional championships. They are losing so much as a result of this. When you take boys who are that much better, and the records they're setting are so much better than girls can possibly ever meet. And so what that means is you're not just eliminating number one, number two. Sometimes you're eliminating the first 100 female athletes or 200 female athletes.
Abigail, I want to also ask you, absolutely, and that was a great point, James. I want to ask you about the classic, the toilet bathrooms. So we had under Obama the big scare campaign, boys and girls can go into each other's toilets. Trump kind of put a stop to that. Now that seems to be back on the agenda. Is that correct?
It does seem that way. I mean, anything that receives federal funding under the Fair Housing Act, anything that is considered a dwelling would be triggered by this. So what that means is battered women's shelters, women's jails, on a national level, all women's safe spaces that receive federal funding are at risk of losing that funding or, being faced with administrative action.
Rita.
Well, Joe Biden, you've got to give him credit, was honest about his agenda in this area. He wants to go even further than sport. He has said that criminals who identify as women should be in women's prisons. Now, what do you see as the implications of that if he follows through with that policy idea as well?
Well, it's one of those things I don't even have to speculate on because we've already seen evidence of women being very badly hurt. In Britain, in America, and elsewhere, biological men, often with sexual assault backgrounds, will identify as women, felons, right before sentencing, can identify as women and end up in women's jails. And I really do believe that putting a biological woman in prison with a male body, often these are, obviously the most menacing of men, is about as close to, cruel and unusual punishment as you can get under the Constitution.
James?
What are we seeing? Sorry, just a follow up on that. What are we seeing from the feminist movement? Because like you said, this is a real threat against girls' and women's rights in America right now. Are the feminists rising up and coming back and saying, wait a second, we are not okay with this?
No, what you're seeing from the feminists is almost complete silence. Now, I mean no disrespect when I say that. There are feminists who are speaking out, who are wonderful. I always mention the Women's Liberation Front has been excellent on this. In Britain, they are excellent in speaking up on these issues. But I have to say, in America, it has been appalling silence from nearly every feminist organization. As long as they have their liberal bona fides, unfortunately, they haven't yet spoken up. They are quietly disturbed by it. They very often raise their concerns in private, but they really need to start speaking up or we're going to lose these rights.
James?
But if they do speak up, they get called TERFs or trans exclusionary radical feminists, and they wind up being canceled. So can you talk a little bit about that sort of internal civil war on the left and what's happening with that? And also, how have you found the reaction to your commentary? Because I know you've been talking about this a lot since the executive order came down. Have they been coming after you, or are there efforts to cancel you? And are you worried that you're going to, wind up, along with all of these other people, being disappeared from the internet and so on because of your taking these positions?
Look, I've already had it happen. I mean, Amazon disappeared my book for a while after it sold out. I mean, this is, something sort of, I've faced these online battles all the time. But the thing is, if we don't speak up, we will lose these rights. It's that simple. And I just, it would be such a shame to have these rights that we fought for generations, lost because we were intimidated by a bunch of people who called us names. That just seems such a frivolous reason to give up material rights.
Abigail Shrier, fantastic to have you back on Outsiders. The name of your book is Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. Abigail, I think we might need an update on that. Irreversible Damage, the Biden craze destroying your nation and half the world. But keep up the terrific work, and we'll speak again soon. And you've got many, many outsiders in Australia behind you and supporting the great work you do. Thanks so much, Abigail Shrier.
The Biden administration putting climate change at the forefront of its policy agenda, rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and canceling Keystone Pipeline permits during the president's first few hours in office. This was just day one. What does this mean for the next 4 years? Mark Morano, executive editor of ClimateDepot.com, joins me live. Mark, let's go through the day one executive orders on climate. You heard Trey mention them. We're going to go through them again, put them up on the screen. Of course, rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, canceling that Keystone XL pipeline permit, and also a moratorium on oil and gas leasing activities in Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So, Mark, when can we expect the air to smell cleaner and the water to taste clearer?
Well, that's the issue. We aren't going to expect that. In fact, President Biden's now entire climate agenda is starting with the United Nations Paris Agreement. You can go back 20 years. Every United Nations climate pact has been hailed as saving the planet. But when you look at the data, emissions of carbon dioxide continue to go up. The United Nations admits it's not about climate. It's about wealth redistribution, sovereignty limiting treaties, and essentially using the climate as a point to regulate society in other ways that have nothing to do with climate. So Biden is going to hammer America first and start affecting American jobs. both with his bans on oil and gas and with rejoining Paris and with getting rid of the canceling the Keystone Pipeline. This is going to hammer middle America, blue-collar America, Americans on middle class and lower income, and it's not going to change the climate one bit. So we're back where we were under President Obama with more climate virtue signaling.
Let's get into the numbers. Here is the Biden climate agenda by the dollars and cents, quite frankly, investing over $400 billion over 10 years in clean energy, reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2050, tighten fracking regulations on federal lands, and conserving 30% of America's land and water by 2030. Walk us through the ways the economy is going to be impacted by this. In other words, how is your bank account, how is my bank account going to get hit by these changes?
Well, the biggest thing is cost of energy is going to go up. In fact, as President Obama said, you know, the cost is going to, quote, necessarily skyrocket. And that's what's going to happen. America went under President Trump, which was a very aggressive pro-domestic energy policy. We became energy not only independent, which politicians have talked about for decades, but energy dominant. For the first time since Harry S. Truman was president, we had more energy exports than imports. And this resulted in an American energy renaissance, which meant we didn't have to go to war to fight for oil or any other source of energy because we were domestically producing it. Cheap, plentiful energy. That policy is now out the door. It's going to have economic implications. It's going to harm labor, big labor, which has been on the side of President Trump, endorsing things like Keystone Pipeline, endorsing these energy projects that President Trump pushed. And keep in mind, this is so important. It's not going to change the weather. The climate's not going to know the difference between what Joe Biden is doing by shutting down the greatest success story of the last decade, which is the domestic American energy revolution.
I need a quick answer on this final question, 15 seconds. Can Biden afford to lose the unions who are not very happy with the Keystone XL decision? And can he afford to lose a liberal prime minister in Canada in Justin Trudeau?
Very good question. President Biden, they knew he was going to do this. The unions are going to have to be, look for other ways for their workers. And this is not a good start for President Obama when it comes to economics.
I mean, President Biden. Although it may feel like President Obama, but that's for a different discussion.
Joe Biden wants to install 500,000 electric vehicle charging cords across the country by the year 2030. It's a move that could cost over $5 billion.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another video, and today I have some huge news for you with regard to the electric vehicle industry. The electric vehicle industry has gained a ton of hype throughout the last few years, to the point where a lot of people call it a bubble that's ready to pop. But with the news that we got today, this bubble will at least survive for a couple more years, because it's going to be growing based off of what our new president said today. This morning during a press conference, he said that he would be replacing the entirety of the government fleet, which is enormous, by the way, with electric vehicles. Now, obviously, from his point of view, this was to attempt to create jobs and to create green energy and all of this. But from the investment point of view, all I'm hearing is that there's going to be a lot more money pumped into this sector, and the stocks today have certainly shown that. In terms of just how big this transformation is going to be, President Biden said, quote, "This would be the largest mobilization of public investment and procurement infrastructure since World War II. This makes sense because the fleet has 650 total thousand vehicles, with 245,000 basic civilian vehicles, 175,000 devoted to military, 225,000 in the post office, and this is only growing every single year as our military and general government continues to expand." Apparently they were already up for replacement. He even said the government has been running bids to replace them, meaning that this has been long in the making, and thank goodness it finally got announced, because a lot of these stocks had become kind of stagnant, but they're making big runs once again. Another thing that this is going to do is increase the general exposure to the EV sector. There's going to be millions of government employees that are now going to be forced to drive and learn to enjoy these vehicles on a daily basis.
Some lawmakers looking a little bit more like moneymakers these days than we did there. Senator Dianne Feinstein didn't report her husband's stock purchase in a timely manner, says that she is willing to pay a fine over that failure. And a move Speaker Pelosi made is also sounding some alarms. Pelosi, or her husband, bought $1 million worth of Tesla stock. Now, here's the catch. She is working to pass Biden's clean energy initiatives, which includes subsidies for electric cars. So she now stands to potentially directly benefit.
Interesting. Do we smell some conflict of interest here? Democratic strategist Andrew Feldman and culture reporter at The Federalist Emily Jashinsky, they join us now to tell us what they think. Andrew, we got to put you on the spot. What do you make of this, man? I don't want to hear the words Trump mentioned at all in your answer.
Yeah, we covered,
Yes.
just don't do the whataboutism,
Yes.
because we cover all this crap on the right too, you know. So what do you think of this?
Well, look, I think that a lot of people that have bet on Tesla are going to be set to benefit. I mean, again, this was back in December, before the administration the new administration took office. You know, I think it's a little bit of a stretch here for there to be a big story in Business Insider on this, to be honest with you. Again, I've heard from friends of mine who have played with Tesla for a long time. This one seems to me like a little bit of a stretch, but I do
explain
think
to me why it's a stretch. Why is
as
it
a
a stretch?
whole, I do think that we need to look at, there really needs to be ethics reform here. I do think across the board, we should examine whether, while members of Congress are in office, if they should be able to be purchasing stocks at all.
Yeah, I don't think we
that's-
should examine it. I think we should ban it. And you might think that the Speaker of the House, as one perfect example, Andrew, might be in a position to move the ball forward on that. Look, it's not like she didn't have any visibility into what the Biden administration's plans would look like. So even if it's technically legal, probably, isn't this a bad look when you've spent years now at this point rightly going after the ethical lapses and corruption on the Trump side?
Well, I know you didn't want me to mention Trump, but again, I think this is different than what some of the other folks we saw from Republican senators, Kelly Loeffler, David Perdue, doing in the Trump administration, right? Selling off stock, keeping things from their constituents and dumping stock. That's a lot different than what's going on here. Again, I know a lot of folks that purchased Tesla in December. So again,
Yeah, but
I think
a lot of
the bigger
folks aren't Speaker of the House, Andrew. A lot of folks purchased Tesla. A lot of folks aren't Speaker of the House. Let me get Emily in here. What do you make of all of this, Emily?
So I'm completely with both of you guys, and then I agree this is something that needs to be banned because, you know, you two live in Washington, we live in Washington, and, you know, it's very much true that just the stuff that flies around here, it's impossible, particularly for members of Congress who have inside information into legislation, into agendas, and they hear from these power brokers all of the time, whether they're in Wall Street or Silicon Valley. It is literally impossible for them to separate their insider knowledge. And it might not be knowledge that is legally insider trading, but it's insider knowledge. It's impossible for them to extricate that and separate it when they're then going about their legislative agenda. Completely impossible. And I don't frankly think it's constructive to pretend that this isn't a totally bipartisan problem, because it absolutely is. The Business Insider story is newsworthy because it shows us that we do need reforms on this. It's a major senator, a major player in the United States Senate. So I think it's well worth considering, and it's another good example of why there does need to be reform here.
Yeah, and I mean, Emily, just expand on that, because as we say with the Tesla thing, look, Nancy Pelosi's worth like a lot of money. I think her husband is a multi-hundred millionaire or whatever.
Plenty of ice cream money.
That's one thing I've never understood here, which is like, what, $1 million bet on stock? Like, is it really going to marginally make a difference in your life? The answer is no. Like, there seems no reason, when these people are already ultra high net worth, that they should even be allowed to trade stocks in the first place.
Well, and a question that a lot of people around the country ask is a question that I had, before I lived here in Washington. It's like, how do these members of Congress enrich their personal bank accounts so much over the course of their time in Washington, D.C.? Some of them come in legitimately with just sort of average net worths. How do they do it? This is very clearly one of the answers to that question.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, Andrew, do you think that there's any like real desire on the Democratic side of the aisle to put? I mean, Democrats in control of the House and the Senate. They can move this legislation if they wanted to ban stock purchases and activity while they're in office. Do you think that there's momentum behind that?
Look, I think we need to see if there can be momentum on any legislation right now. To be honest with you, you're looking at a 50-50 Senate and some conservative members, right? I do think that this needs to be part of ethics and democracy reform, right? These were things that we talked about and should be considered when we reintroduce, and I believe that it may have already been reintroduced, but HR 1, which was the big piece of democracy and ethics legislation put forward last Congress. This is something that they should absolutely look at being added in there. But I got to be honest with you, this is not something that we need to do stuff right now that affects the well-being of the American people. Relief, COVID relief, economic relief. And, that's what I really think we need to be focused on. That we need to get money into the bottom lines of Americans. And I think this is an issue. I don't disagree with you. But again, I don't think it's something right away that could impact American people.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no disagreement on the need for relief, but I think they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Okay, guys, great discussion. Stick with us. More Team Rising right after this.
The Chinese are now threatening to do nothing on climate change if the US does insist on carrying on with the genocide accusations. So climate change, the big thing, oh, no. But we won't, you attack us on genocide, that's it, we're out of it on climate change, which of course shows they're never going to do anything on it anyway. But let's move on. This is a really important story. Pakistan's Supreme Court have ordered the release of the repellent jihadist Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh, who was the main suspect in the kidnapping and decapitation of Daniel Pearl, the Wall Street reporter. There was a great movie, A Mighty Heart, with Angelina Jolie. Rita, tell us all about this.
Well, this is just shocking. It's absolutely devastated Daniel Pearl's family. The US is saying that they're going to seek to prosecute Sheikh, who's British-born themselves. The High Court last year, just to give you a bit of background, released the co-accused, and it changed the main culprit's death sentence to a life in prison. But now the Supreme Court in Pakistan has released him. This is an Islamist, like you said, who kidnapped this journalist, beheaded him on camera. He should never see the light of day again. And for Pakistan Supreme Court to do this, I think, is an absolute outrage for every victim of terrorism.
And as you say, the family are absolutely horrified by this.
Now, can you believe it? China has been preaching about the virtues of countries working together and warned that big nations should not bully small nations. This is incredible stuff. Chinese President Xi Jinping was talking virtually to the World Economic Forum annual Davos Gabfest, and what he said was remarkable for its irony. Have a listen to this.
State-to-state relations should be coordinated and regulated through proper institutions and rules. The strong should not bully the weak. Decisions should not be made by simply showing off strong muscles or waving a big fist.
Waving a big fist. This is a nation that's indulging in trade sanctions against Australia and wolf warrior diplomacy, a nation that ignores international law in the South China Sea and intimidates its neighbours, including the so-called rogue province, Democratic Taiwan, with military might. Yet Xi Jinping warns about bullying and the prospects of another Cold War.
To build small circles or start a new Cold War, to reject, threaten or intimidate others, to willfully impose decoupling, supply disruption or sanctions, and to create isolation or estrangement will only push the world into division and even confrontation.
Confrontation. The hypocrisy here is astonishing. The very behaviour China is warning of is the behaviour that characterises its modern posture. Clearly, these words show China knows how the international order should work, but its warning of confrontation is pretty ominous, I reckon. I'm joined now by the Executive Director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Peter Jennings. Peter, in this speech, did you find it encouraging that China seemed to know what it should be doing, or chilling that it doesn't seem to worry about what it is doing?
Well, it's a large steaming pile of hypocrisy, Chris. There's no question about that. And of course, Xi Jinping is able enough to understand the huge difference between what he's saying and what he's actually doing. An interesting element here is that he has used Davos over several years now to try to position himself amongst Western elites as being a progressive supporter of the rules-based international order. And to some extent, they seem to be prepared to lap it up. I think in 2021, that's probably much less believable now than it was a few years ago. But, you know, clearly the gulf between what Xi Jinping says and what Xi Jinping is doing couldn't be any wider. And I hope that people will understand that and actually realise that the warm words don't really mean anything when it comes to China relentlessly pursuing its self-interest.
Yeah, its actions are drastically at odds with what it's saying there. Now, put this into context with us in 2021. We've got a new administration in Washington. The Democrats and Joe Biden say they'll be just as tough on China, yet they're already opting into more multilateral agreements and multilateral diplomacy. Does Beijing see a weak moment here? And how worried should we be about their intimidation of Taiwan?
Well, as China has done with past new administrations, they're probing for weaknesses and they're looking to see what they can get away with. Over the weekend, just past, Chris, we saw an extremely high tempo of aggressive Chinese combat aircraft activity into Taiwanese airspace in numbers that we haven't seen before. 13 aircraft flying into Taiwanese airspace on Saturday, followed by a US State Department statement saying don't do that, don't bully Taiwan. And then after that, a further 15 Chinese aircraft flying in on Sunday. So this is a very direct test of the will of Joe Biden. So far, the Biden administration, I think, has been saying the right things. But what we have to wait and see is just how much weight is Biden going to put on the protection of Taiwan. I think we can be reasonably confident, but it is a new administration. Biden does have some form with Xi Jinping, and so what we're really all waiting to see is if he has moved on from the somewhat more positive relationship that China had with the United States under Obama to the reality of today, where China, frankly, is a much more difficult customer. And Biden's going to have to be prepared to stand up to that. His first test is going to be Taiwan, and I suspect we're going to see this play out literally in days and weeks ahead.
Peter Jennings, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
Peter Jennings there from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute.
China is fighting the coronavirus with a brand new test. You might feel a slight pinch. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. China has a new coronavirus test, and it's a real pain in the butt. Now, I don't want to taint your view of China's anal swab test. Some Chinese experts claim it's way more effective. One specialist told CCTV, if we add anal swab testing, it can raise our rate of identifying infected patients. But of course, considering that collecting anal swabs is not as convenient as throat swabs, at the moment, only key groups, such as those in quarantine, receive both. Sure, it's not as convenient. But if you're going to be forced into a Chinese quarantine center, you might as well have a little fun, right? So how does the test work? Don't worry, they've made diagrams. You only have to put the swab in about 1 to 2 inches deep. Of course, it's also helpful to know what the heck is happening. Apparently, some residents in China's northern regions have been subjected to the swabs with little warning. Surprise! This new test couldn't come soon enough. It's almost Chinese New Year. That's the biggest travel holiday in China. An estimated 3 billion trips happen during a normal year. That's not good during a pandemic. Already, more than 22 million people are under lockdown. And so, more than 1,000 school children and teachers in Beijing were given anal, throat, and nose swabs last week. I hope not all at once. On the plus side, I can't wait for the next New York Times article praising how well China is handling the pandemic. Those reporters can be the first ones to try out the test in America. Of course, one expert told Bloomberg, "I don't understand why Beijing added anal swabs." Well, they don't call it a communist party for nothing. While a couple of studies have shown that in some cases, the coronavirus is still detectable in stool samples, even after it doesn't show up anymore in nose or throat swabs, it's not clear that means anything when it comes to spreading the virus. There's no evidence that virus transmission is any more common among patients who test positive in the anus area. All I know is I do not envy the scientists who have to run that study. China doesn't have any nationwide policy about the anal swab. So, that leaves its use in the hands of overzealous local officials who will implement any policies that might stamp out the coronavirus, or even policies that just make it look like they're stamping out the coronavirus. No one wants to be in charge of the next Wuhan. As the Washington Post puts it, since the beginning of the pandemic, China has been willing to take draconian measures to halt the spread of the coronavirus, even at enormous inconvenience to its population. In the early days of lockdowns, health officials sometimes sealed apartment buildings to keep people from leaving. Millions were rounded up for overnight flash testing drives, with people forming lines in the streets in darkness. In darkness? That's the perfect environment for an anal swab. And the problem is, now that anal swabs have become a thing, unless someone in the central government comes out and says to stop, more and more areas will implement them, regardless of whether they actually help. That's how it works in China's communist system. Another example of this is the problem that China is now having with food imports. In their eagerness to blame the coronavirus on any other country that's not China, Chinese state-run media have been running a propaganda campaign about how the virus may have come from imported frozen foods. Meanwhile, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization have both said that there's no evidence that anyone has gotten the coronavirus from frozen foods or food packaging. But people in China are now scared of buying imported food. And frozen food is just sitting at Chinese ports for weeks, causing a huge backup in the global food supply chain. Some areas in China are now also dealing with food shortages and skyrocketing food prices due to lockdowns. People aren't happy about the high food prices, but they're even less thrilled about the anal swabs. Obviously, people are concerned about government overreach. Or would this be underreach? But really, to help protect the public from the coronavirus, is there anything you wouldn't let the government do to you? Or are you a monster? Anyway, no matter how bad things get in America, let's just say they got it a lot worse in China. And this kind of penetrating, deep China coverage would not be possible without the support from viewers like you.